In the ancient kingdom of Luminara, where legends are forged in the fires of sacrifice, the Silver Guardians stand as the last line of defense against the encroaching darkness. Tonight, the fate of the realm rests on the shoulders of one young warrior, Kale, who stands trembling at the edge of the whispering forest. Clutched tightly in his hand is the shattered shard of his father's sword, a symbol of a legacy he fears he cannot live up to. The Silver Amulet, a relic tied to the very essence of the Guardian's power, has been lost deep within the forest's shadowed depths. Without it, the kingdom will fall to the relentless Shadow Horde. But the forest is no ordinary place. Its whispers are alive, weaving tales of terror and warning. As Kale takes his first step into the unknown, he knows this is no ordinary quest. It's a journey that will test not just his courage, but his very soul. What awaits him in the heart of the forest? And will he emerge as the hero Luminara desperately needs, or will the whispers claim him forever? The story begins here, where legends are born and destinies are sealed. The air in the whispering forest grew heavier with every step Kale took, the silence pressing against his ears like a suffocating blanket. No birds sang, no leaves rustled, only the faint, eerie whispers that seemed to curl around him like tendrils of mist. His grip tightened on the broken shard of his father's sword, its jagged edges biting into his palm as a reminder of the burden he carried. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a presence, watching, waiting. As he pressed forward, a faint whimper pierced the stillness. Kale froze, his instincts screaming at him to stay hidden, but the sound tugged at something deeper within him. Moving cautiously, he found the source. A wolf, its silver fur glistening as though bathed in moonlight, lying wounded beneath a gnarled tree. Its amber eyes met his, filled not with fear, but with a quiet intelligence that made his breath catch. The creature was no ordinary beast. It radiated an otherworldly energy, a guardian of the forest itself. Kale hesitated. Time was slipping away, and the Silver Amulet still lay hidden somewhere in the depths. But the wolf's pain was undeniable, and the thought of leaving it to suffer felt like a betrayal of the very ideals the Silver Guardian stood for. Kneeling, he tore a strip of cloth from his cloak and carefully bound the wolf's wound, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of the choice he'd made. Every second spent here was a second closer to Luminara's doom, yet he couldn't turn away. The wolf's breathing steadied, and as it rose, its form seemed to shimmer, as though the moonlight itself had taken shape. A low, resonant voice echoed in Kale's mind, not spoken but felt. You have shown compassion where others would have turned away. For this, I offer you a warning. The forest is alive, and it does not welcome intruders. Its paths will deceive you, its shadows will hunt you. Trust not what you see, for even the ground beneath your feet may betray you. Before Kale could respond, the wolf vanished into the trees, leaving only a faint glow where it had stood. He was alone again, but the encounter left him with a strange sense of clarity. The forest wasn't just a backdrop to his journey. It was an active player, testing him, challenging him. And now, as the trees seemed to close in around him, he felt the first stirrings of its hostility. The path ahead twisted unnaturally, branches reaching out like grasping hands. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, shifting and darting as though alive. Kale's heart pounded, but he forced himself to move forward, his every step measured and deliberate. The forest was alive, and it was watching. Every rustle, every whisper, felt like a taunt, a reminder that he was an intruder in a realm that did not want him. Yet, even as the tension coiled tighter, he couldn't shake the feeling that the wolf's warning had been more than just a caution. It had been a key. The forest was testing him, and his choices would determine whether he emerged as its conqueror or its prey. The forest seemed to tighten its grip around Kale as he pressed deeper into its shadowed heart. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the trees themselves were conspiring against him. Just as doubt began to creep into his mind, the dense foliage parted, revealing a sight that stopped him in his tracks. Before him stood an ancient shrine, its stone surface weathered by time, yet radiating an eerie, otherworldly glow. Its carvings pulsed faintly with a light that seemed to breathe, alive and watchful. Surrounding the shrine were spectral figures, their forms translucent and shimmering like mist under moonlight. Their hollow eyes locked onto Kale, and a voice cold and ancient echoed in his mind. Only through sacrifice shall the path be revealed. Kale's breath hitched. The words hung heavy in the air, a demand that left no room for negotiation. A sacrifice of blood, his blood. His hand instinctively tightened around the jagged shard of his father's sword, its edges pressing into his skin. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, a crossroads between fear and duty. To turn back would mean abandoning Luminara to its fate, but to proceed, he glanced at his palm, already marked by the forest's trials. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, Kale pressed the shard against his palm, wincing as the sharp edge bit into his flesh. Blood welled up, droplets falling onto the shrine's surface. The moment the first drop touched the stone, the shrine erupted with a blinding light. The spectral figures bowed their heads in unison, and the carvings on the shrine began to shift, swirling and reforming into a map etched in luminous lines. The amulet's location was revealed, but the triumph was short-lived. A low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of snapping branches. The Shadow Horde had sensed the shrine's awakening. Kale's heart raced as he scanned the map, committing its details to memory. The shrine's light began to dim, and with it, the spectral figures faded into the air. He was alone again, but not for long. The forest seemed to shudder, the whispers now tinged with urgency. The horde was close, too close. He could feel their presence like a cold wind at his back, the kind that promised nothing but death. Without hesitation, Kale turned and sprinted into the trees. The map's glowing lines still burned into his vision. The forest's paths twisted and turned, but he moved with a newfound determination, driven by the knowledge that every second counted. The horde's scouts were relentless, their gnarled forms crashing through the underbrush behind him. He could hear their snarls, the clatter of their claws against stone, and the ominous rhythm of their pursuit. But Kale didn't stop. He couldn't. The shrine's trial had set him on this path, and now he had no choice but to run, not just for his life, but for the fate of Luminara. The forest seemed to shift around him, its once silent whispers now a chorus of warnings. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself was conspiring to slow him down. Yet Kale pushed forward, his mind racing as much as his body. The shrine had tested him, and he had passed, but the true trial was only beginning. The Shadow Horde was closing in, and the amulet, the key to Luminara's salvation, was still out of reach. He would have to be faster, smarter, and braver than ever before. The forest had chosen him, but now it was up to Kale to prove he was worthy of its trust. The forest's oppressive silence was shattered by the snap of a twig behind Kale. He spun around, sword shard at the ready, only to find himself face to face with a lithe figure cloaked in shadows. Her eyes gleamed like polished steel, sharp and calculating, as she stepped into a sliver of moonlight. "You're either very brave or very foolish to wander this deep alone," she said, her voice laced with amusement. "Name's Lyra, and if you're looking for the Silver Amulet, you're going the wrong way." Kale's grip on the shard tightened, his instincts screaming caution. Lyra moved with the grace of a predator, her every step deliberate, her every word measured. She was no ordinary traveler, this much was clear. "And why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease clawing at his chest. Lyra smirked, her gaze flickering to the blood still staining his palm. "Because I know this forest better than you know your own reflection. I can get you to the amulet faster than you'd ever manage on your own, but it'll cost you." Her tone shifted, the playful edge giving way to something darker. "A share of its power, that's my price." The offer hung in the air, a dangerous gamble. Kale's mind raced. Time was running out, and the Shadow Horde was closing in. He couldn't afford to waste hours wandering aimlessly, but trusting a stranger, a thief, no less felt like a risk too great to take. Yet, what choice did he have? The forest was a maze of deception, and Lyra's confidence was impossible to ignore. "Fine," he said at last, his voice low, "but if you betray me, I won't hesitate." Lyra's smirk widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Good, let's move." Their alliance was uneasy from the start. Lyra led the way with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her movements quick and silent. Kale followed, his senses on high alert, every fiber of his being warning him to stay vigilant. The forest seemed to close in around them, its whispers growing louder, more frantic. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, and the air grew colder with every step. It wasn't long before the first attack came. A guttural snarl erupted from the darkness, and a shadow beast lunged at them, its form a writhing mass of claws and teeth. Kale barely had time to react, but Lyra was already in motion. With a flick of her wrist, a dagger flew through the air, striking the creature's eye. It recoiled with a howl, giving Kale the opening he needed to drive his shard into its chest. The beast dissolved into smoke, but more were coming. Lyra's cunning was undeniable. She moved like a shadow herself, slipping between the trees and striking with precision. Together, they fought off the ambush, but the encounter left Kale uneasy. Lyra's skill was impressive, but her motives remained a mystery. Why would a thief risk her life for a relic she couldn't wield? And what did she truly want with its power? As they pressed on, the tension between them grew palpable. The forest's whispers seemed to taunt Kale, their words echoing his doubts. "Trust no one." The Shadow Horde's presence grew heavier, their guttural cries echoing through the trees. Kale's resolve hardened. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a moment. Lyra might have saved him, but her actions only deepened his suspicion. The stakes were higher than ever. The amulet was within reach, but the path to it was fraught with danger, both from the forest and from the ally at his side. Kale's journey had become a test not just of strength, but of judgment. Every decision carried weight, every alliance a potential betrayal, and as the shadows closed in, he realized the hardest truth of all. In the heart of the Whispering Forest, trust was the most dangerous weapon of all. The air grew colder as Kale and Lyra stepped into the Cavern of Echoes. Its entrance, a jagged maw of stone that seemed to breathe with a faint, eerie hum. The walls shimmered with an unnatural light, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. Every step echoed unnaturally, as though the cavern itself was alive, listening, waiting. The amulet was close, Kale could feel it, but the air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The cavern's illusions began almost immediately. One moment, Kale was walking beside Lyra. The next, he was standing in the ruins of his childhood home, the scent of smoke and ash filling his lungs. His father stood before him, tall and unyielding, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You were never meant to carry this burden," his father's voice boomed, echoing with a finality that struck Kale to his core. "You're not strong enough, not worthy." The words cut deeper than any blade, and for a moment, Kale felt the weight of his doubts crushing him. He wanted to argue, to scream that he was trying, but the vision felt so real, so suffocating, that he could barely breathe. Then, like a spark in the darkness, Kale remembered the wolf's words, "Trust not what you see." This wasn't his father. This was the cavern, preying on his fears, twisting his insecurities into weapons. He clenched his fists, the jagged shard of his father's sword pressing into his palm, and forced himself to meet the vision's gaze. "I may not be what you wanted," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "but I am what Luminara needs." The illusion shattered like glass, leaving him standing alone in the cavern's dim light. Lyra wasn't so fortunate. Kale found her a short distance away, her face pale, her eyes wide with an anguish he hadn't seen before. She was kneeling, her hands clutching at the air as though trying to hold on to something, or someone. "They left me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a vulnerability that made her seem almost unrecognizable. "They all left me." Her past, it seemed, had come back to haunt her, a wound she'd buried deep now laid bare by the cavern's cruel magic. Kale hesitated. Time was slipping away, and the Shadow Horde was closing in, but the sight of Lyra, so broken and lost, stirred something in him. He couldn't leave her like this. Kneeling beside her, he placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm but gentle. "This isn't who you are. Whatever happened, it doesn't define you. You're stronger than this." For a moment, she didn't respond, her gaze still locked on the phantom memories. Then, slowly, she nodded, her resolve hardening once more. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice low but steady. Their bond, forged in the crucible of the cavern's trials, felt stronger now, but the cavern wasn't done with them. As they pressed forward, the ground beneath them began to shift, the walls closing in. A deafening roar filled the air, and before Kale could react, the floor gave way, sending him tumbling into darkness. When he landed, he was alone. Lyra was gone, the cavern's final trap having separated them. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something else, something ancient and powerful. Ahead, the cavern opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood the Silver Amulet, suspended in a beam of light that seemed to defy the darkness. But between Kale and the relic stood a towering figure, its form shifting and indistinct, like a shadow given life. The amulet's guardian, its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and when it spoke, its voice was a low, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through Kale's very bones. "Prove yourself," it commanded, its words carrying the weight of centuries, "or perish." Kale tightened his grip on the shard, his heart pounding but his mind clear. This was at the moment he'd been preparing for. The cavern had tested his resolve, his compassion, his ability to face his fears. Now it was time to prove he was worthy of the amulet and of the title of Silver Guardian. The Guardian lunged, its form a blur of shadow and light, and Kale met it head on, his every movement fueled by the lessons he'd learned and the trials he'd overcome. The battle had begun, and the fate of Luminara hung in the balance. The cavern trembled as the Guardian lunged at Kale, its massive stone fists crashing into the ground with a force that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. Kale barely dodged, the jagged shard of his father's sword clutched tightly in his hand. The golem was a towering behemoth, its body etched with glowing runes that pulsed with ancient magic. Each step it took shook the ground, and its glowing eyes locked onto Kale with an unrelenting focus. This wasn't just a fight, it was a test of wits, a battle where brute strength would mean nothing. Kale's mind raced as he circled the Guardian, his breaths coming in short, sharp bursts. He couldn't overpower it, that much was clear, but as he dodged another swing, a memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. His father's voice echoed in his mind, calm and steady. "A warrior's strength lies not in his blade, but in his mind. Use the battlefield, make it your ally." The words struck a chord, and Kale's eyes darted around the chamber. The cavern's walls were jagged, its ceiling dotted with stalactites that glistened in the faint light. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones and cracks. The environment itself could be his weapon. With a burst of speed, Kale darted behind a cluster of stalagmites, the golem's fists crashing into the stone behind him. He grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at the golem's head, not to harm it, but to provoke. The Guardian roared, its glowing eyes narrowing as it charged. Kale waited, his heart pounding, until the last possible moment before diving out of the way. The golem's momentum carried it forward, and its massive body collided with a stalactite hanging precariously from the ceiling. The impact sent a cascade of rocks tumbling down, burying the golem's legs in rubble. It was Kale's chance. He scrambled up the golem's immobilized form, the jagged shard gleaming in his hand. With a fierce cry, he drove it into the rune glowing on the golem's chest. The stone cracked, the rune's light flickering before fading entirely. The golem let out a final, guttural roar before collapsing into a heap of rubble, its form crumbling into dust. Breathless and battered, Kale turned to the silver amulet, still suspended in its beam of light. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against its cool surface. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy shot through him, so intense it felt like lightning coursing through his veins. The amulet's power was overwhelming, a flood of raw magic that threatened to consume him. His vision blurred, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer force of it. He stumbled back, clutching the amulet to his chest, his mind struggling to process the torrent of energy. But the amulet's power didn't just affect Kale. Its glow intensified, piercing through the cavern's shadows and illuminating the chamber like a beacon. And in the distance, a low, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. The Shadow Horde had sensed the amulet's awakening. Their snarls grew louder, their clawed feet scraping against stone as they poured into the cavern, drawn by the amulet's light like moths to a flame. Kale's heart sank. He had the amulet, but the cost was clear. The cavern was no longer a sanctuary, it was a trap. The Horde's numbers were overwhelming, their forms a chaotic blur of claws and teeth. He couldn't fight them all, not here, not now. With the amulet's power still coursing through him, he turned and ran, his every step fueled by desperation. The cavern's walls seemed to close in around him, the whispers of the forest replaced by the Horde's relentless cries. The path ahead was a blur, his vision still swimming from the amulet's energy. But Kale didn't stop. He couldn't. The Horde was close, too close. He could feel their breath on his neck, hear the snap of their jaws as they closed the distance. The cavern's exit was just ahead, a sliver of moonlight breaking through the darkness. He pushed himself harder, his legs burning, his lungs screaming for air. The amulet's power pulsed in his hand, a constant reminder of what was at stake. As he burst into the open air, the forest greeted him with a cacophony of whispers, their tone urgent, almost frantic. The Horde was still behind him, their guttural cries echoing through the trees. Kale didn't look back. He couldn't. The amulet was his now, but so was the responsibility it carried. The forest, the Horde, the fate of Luminara, it all rested on his shoulders, and as he disappeared into the shadows of the whispering forest, one thing was clear. The hardest part of his journey was just beginning. Kale stumbled out of the cavern, the silver amulet glowing fiercely in his hand, its light cutting through the forest's oppressive darkness. The weight of its power was almost too much to bear, and his legs threatened to give out beneath him. Just as he thought he might collapse, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Lyra's sharp eyes locked onto his, relief flickering briefly before being replaced by her usual guarded expression. "Took you long enough," she said, her tone dry but with a hint of something softer beneath the surface. "You look like death warmed over." Before Kale could respond, the forest erupted with guttural snarls and the sound of snapping branches. The Shadow Horde had followed him, their twisted forms emerging from the trees like shadows given life. They moved with a terrifying coordination, their glowing eyes fixed on the amulet. At their head stood a towering figure, a warlord clad in jagged, blackened armor. His presence was suffocating, his voice a low growl that seemed to echo in Kale's very bones. "The amulet belongs to us, boy," the warlord sneered, raising a massive, clawed hand. "Your defiance ends here." Kale's heart pounded, his grip tightening on the amulet. He could feel its energy pulsing, a raw force begging to be unleashed, but using it came with a cost. He could sense that much already. Still, what choice did he have? As the Horde closed in, Kale raised the amulet high, its light flaring brighter than the sun. A barrier of pure, radiant energy burst forth, repelling the advancing creatures with a force that shook the ground. The warlord snarled, his form momentarily obscured by the blinding light, but Kale could feel his rage, his determination. The strain was immediate and excruciating. It felt as though every ounce of his strength was being drained, every fiber of his being stretched to its limit. His vision blurred, his legs buckled, and the world seemed to tilt beneath him. He barely registered Lyra's voice, sharp and urgent, as she caught him before he hit the ground. "You idiot," she hissed, her arms steady despite the chaos around them. "You can't just throw yourself into the fire like that." The barrier held, but Kale could feel it wavering, his connection to the amulet slipping with every passing second. Lyra didn't hesitate. Slinging his arm over her shoulders, she half dragged, half carried him away from the fray, her movements quick and precise despite the added weight. The forest seemed to close in around them, its whispers now a cacophony of warnings and threats. Behind them, the warlord's voice boomed, a promise laced with venom. "Run, little rats. The Horde does not forget, and we do not relent. You cannot escape us." Kale's consciousness flickered in and out, the amulet's power still coursing through him like a storm. He could feel its potential, its immense strength, but also its danger. It wasn't just a tool. It was a lifeline, a weapon, and a burden all at once. Every use came at a price, and he was beginning to understand just how steep that price could be. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling with exhaustion, but Lyra's grip never faltered. She moved with a single-minded determination, her focus unwavering even as the Horde's cries grew fainter behind them. When they finally stopped, hidden deep within a cluster of ancient trees, Kale collapsed onto the ground, the amulet's glow dimming to a faint pulse. Lyra crouched beside him, her expression unreadable. "You're lucky I stuck around," she muttered, though there was a faint edge of concern in her voice. "You've got no idea what you're doing with that thing, do you?" Kale shook his head weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm learning, but it's more than I expected." Lyra's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Well, you'd better figure it out fast. That warlord isn't going to stop, and neither are his creatures. The Horde doesn't just hunt. They destroy. And they'll keep coming until they get what they want." The weight of her words settled over Kale like a shroud. The amulet was more than a relic. It was a beacon, a target. And now it was his to protect. His journey had never been just about retrieving the amulet. It was about understanding its power, mastering it, and ensuring it didn't fall into the wrong hands. But as he lay there, battered and drained, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest trials were still ahead. The Horde was relentless, the Warlord was ruthless, and the amulet's power was as much a curse as it was a blessing. The fight for Luminara's survival had only just begun. The forest grew denser, its shadows deepening as Kale and Lyra pressed forward, their steps quick but unsteady. Kale's strength was fading, the amulet's power a constant drain on his body, but Lyra's grip on his arm never wavered. Just as the weight of exhaustion threatened to overtake him, the trees parted, revealing a hidden clearing bathed in soft, golden light. At its center stood a village, its structures woven seamlessly into the forest itself, homes of living wood, bridges of twisted vines, and a quiet hum of life that felt both ancient and welcoming. The villagers emerged cautiously, their eyes sharp with suspicion. These were no ordinary people. Their movements were fluid, almost ethereal, as though they were extensions of the forest itself. An elder stepped forward, her silver hair catching the light like spider silk. "You bring danger to our doorstep," she said, her voice a blend of authority and sorrow. "The Shadow Horde stench clings to you. Why should we offer sanctuary to those who would lead ruin to our home?" Kale's breath hitched, his mind racing. He had no words to refute her claim. She was right. The Horde was coming, and their presence here put the village at risk. But before he could speak, a faint cry broke the silence. A child, no older than 6, lay on a woven mat, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. The villagers' eyes shifted to the child, their expressions a mix of fear and helplessness. Without hesitation, Kale stepped forward, the amulet glowing faintly in his hand. "Let me help her," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing him down. The elder hesitated, her gaze flickering between Kale and the amulet. Finally, she nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betraying a flicker of hope. Kale knelt beside the child, his hands trembling as he placed the amulet on her chest. The light flared, a gentle warmth spreading through the air. The child's breathing steadied, her color returning as the amulet's power flowed into her. The villagers gasped, their wary expressions softening into awe. The elder's voice broke the silence, softer now, tinged with gratitude. "You have shown us your heart. For that, you are welcome here." But the peace was fleeting. As night fell, the village's quiet hum was shattered by the distant sound of snapping branches and guttural snarls. The Horde's spies had found them. Kale's heart sank as he realized the truth. The village was no longer safe. He turned to Lyra, her face grim but resolute. "We need to leave," she said, her voice low. "If we stay, we'll lead the Horde straight to them." Kale's gaze shifted to the villagers, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The child he had healed clung to her mother, her eyes wide but unafraid. He couldn't abandon them, not after they had offered him refuge, not after he had seen the strength of their spirit. "No," he said, his voice firm. "We stay, we fight." The battle that followed was chaos. The Horde's spies moved like shadows, their forms twisting and shifting as they descended upon the village. Kale's leadership emerged not through grand speeches, but through quiet resolve. He rallied the villagers, his every action a testament to his belief in their survival. Together, they formed a line of defense, their weapons crude but their spirits unyielding. The fighting was brutal, the air thick with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. Kale fought with everything he had, the amulet its light a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. His movements were sharp, his mind clear despite the exhaustion threatening to overtake him. Lyra fought beside him, her daggers a blur of silver as she cut down their enemies with ruthless precision. As the night wore on, the tide began to turn. The villagers, inspired by Kale's courage, fought with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. The Horde's spies, unprepared for such resistance, began to falter. When the last of them fell, the village erupted in cheers, their voices a chorus of triumph and relief. Kale stood amidst the wreckage, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. The villagers gathered around him, their eyes filled with gratitude and newfound respect. The elder approached, her expression softer now, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. You have proven yourself not just to us, but to the forest itself. It will remember your sacrifice. The victory was hard-won, but Kale knew it was only the beginning. The Horde would return, stronger and more determined than ever. Yet, as he looked out over the village, its people standing tall despite the odds, he felt a flicker of hope. The amulet's power was immense, but so was the strength of those who stood with him. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. The village stood in the aftermath of battle, its once serene clearing now scarred by the clash of steel and shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and the echoes of loss. Bodies lay scattered, both friend and foe, a grim reminder of the price they had paid for survival. Kale stood amidst the wreckage, his hands trembling as he clutched the silver amulet. Its light, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. He had fought to protect these people, and yet, so many had still fallen. The faces of the dead haunted him, men, women, even children who had looked to him for salvation. He had failed them, and the guilt was a poison that coursed through his veins. Lyra approached silently, her usual sharp demeanor softened by the gravity of the moment. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him as his thoughts threatened to spiral. You're carrying too much, she said, her voice low but steady. This isn't just on you. The Horde chose this war, not us. Kale turned to her, his eyes shadowed with despair. But I led them here, he replied, his voice cracking. If I had been stronger, faster, maybe they'd still be alive. For a moment, Lyra hesitated, her gaze distant as if wrestling with memories of her own. Then she spoke, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it. I know what it's like to lose people, to feel like you could have done more. When I was younger, I had a family, a brother. We were thieves, yes, but we had each other. Then the Horde came. They took him, and I couldn't save him. I carried that guilt for years, letting it eat away at me until I became someone I barely recognized. But here's the truth, Kale. Guilt won't bring them back, and it won't save those who are still alive. Her words struck a chord, cutting through the fog of his despair. Kale's grip on the amulet tightened, its light pulsing faintly, as though responding to his resolve. He looked out over the village, at the survivors tending to the wounded and rebuilding what they could. Their resilience was a spark in the darkness, a reminder of what they were fighting for. You're right, he said, his voice firming. I can't change what's happened. But I can make sure their sacrifices weren't in vain. The Horde won't stop until they've destroyed everything, and if I can use this amulet to stop them, to unite the kingdom against them, then that's what I'll do. The village elder approached, her silver hair glinting in the fading light. In her hands, she held a small, intricately carved talisman, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer with an inner glow. You have proven your heart and your strength, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. This talisman is a relic of our ancestors, a fragment of the forest's own power. It will enhance the amulet's strength, but it will also bind you to the forest's will. Use it wisely, for its power is as much a burden as a gift. Kale accepted the talisman, the moment heavy with significance. As he attached it to the amulet, a surge of energy coursed through him, brighter and more intense than before. The amulet's light flared, illuminating the clearing and casting long shadows across the trees. The villagers gathered around him, their faces a mixture of awe and gratitude. One by one, they placed their hands on the amulet, their silent prayers weaving into its light. It was a gesture of trust, a bond forged in the fires of battle. As Kale and Lyra prepared to leave, the weight of his responsibility settled over him like a mantle. The amulet's power was greater now, but so too was the cost of wielding it. He could feel the forest's presence, a silent observer guiding his steps. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time, Kale felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just his fight. It was the fight of everyone who believed in a future free from the Shadow Horde's shadow. And as he stepped into the forest's embrace, the whispers of the trees seemed to echo his resolve. The path is yours to carve, but you do not walk it alone. The journey to the Silver Citadel was grueling, the path ahead a labyrinth of jagged cliffs and dense, twisting forests. Kale and Lyra moved swiftly but cautiously, their steps measured, their senses sharp. The air was thick with tension, not just from the threat of the Shadow Horde, but from the unspoken questions that lingered between them. The amulet pulsed faintly at Kale's side, its light a constant reminder of the power and the danger he carried. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every whisper of the wind felt like a warning, but it wasn't the forest or the horde that would test them most. It was each other. The first trial came without warning. A narrow stone bridge stretched across a chasm, its surface slick with moss and crumbling at the edges. Kale hesitated, his gaze flickering to the yawning abyss below. "We'll have to cross one at a time," he said, his voice tense. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable as she gestured for him to go first. He took a cautious step, the stones groaning beneath his weight. Halfway across, the bridge gave a violent shudder. Kale's heart leapt into his throat as the stones beneath his feet collapsed, sending him plummeting toward the void. Lyra moved faster than thought. She lunged forward, her hand closing around his wrist with a grip like iron. For a moment, they hung there, suspended over the chasm, the sound of falling stones echoing into the depths below. Kale's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes locked on hers. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no trace of doubt. She hauled him up with a strength that belied her slender frame, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You owe me one," she said, her tone dry but her eyes betraying a flicker of something deeper. The moment passed, but the weight of it lingered. Kale couldn't shake the image of her hand reaching out, the way she had risked herself without a second thought. It wasn't just trust that bound them now. It was something more, something unspoken. Yet as they pressed on, he couldn't ignore the questions that gnawed at him. Why had she saved him? What did she truly want? And why did her past feel like a shadow she refused to let him see? The forest grew darker, the air colder, as they ventured deeper. It was there that the second trial found them. A shadow beast emerged from the trees, its form a writhing mass of claws and teeth, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. It lunged at Lyra, its movements too fast for her to react. Without thinking, Kale stepped between them, the amulet's light flaring as he raised his father's shard. The beast struck with a force that sent him sprawling, his vision swimming as pain erupted across his chest. Lyra's cry cut through the chaos, her daggers flashing as she struck at the creature with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. Together, they brought the beast down, but the cost was clear. Kale lay bleeding, his breath shallow, his vision fading. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a cloth to his wound. "You idiot," she murmured, her voice thick with something he couldn't quite place. "You could have died." Kale managed a weak smile, his voice barely a whisper. "Guess we're even now," but the joke fell flat, the weight of the moment settling over them. Lyra's hands lingered on his chest, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betraying a storm of emotions. For the first time, Kale saw past her guarded exterior, glimpsing the vulnerability she so carefully hid. It was a crack in her armor, and it left him with more questions than answers. As they continued their journey, the tension between them grew palpable. Kale couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra was hiding something big. Her past, her motives, her connection to the Guardians. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. And when they finally reached the outskirts of the Silver Citadel, the truth began to unravel. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man clad in the armor of the Guardians, his eyes filled with recognition and accusation. "Lyra," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "You dare show your face here after what you've done?" The words hung in the air like a blade, cutting through the fragile trust they had built. Kale turned to Lyra, his heart sinking as he saw the guilt etched across her face. "What is he talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the ground, her silence speaking volumes. The man stepped forward, his voice rising with anger. "She betrayed us, sold our secrets to the highest bidder, and now she's come crawling back, no doubt with another scheme." Kale's mind reeled, the pieces falling into place. Her skill, her knowledge, her reluctance to speak of her past. It all made sense now, but it didn't make it hurt any less. He turned to Lyra, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Is it true?" he asked, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with a pain he hadn't seen before. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely audible. "I had my reasons." The air between them was thick with tension, the fragile bond they had built teetering on the edge of collapse. Kale didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear. Their journey to the Silver Citadel was no longer just about the amulet or the Horde. It was about trust, betrayal, and the choices that would define who they were and who they would become. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The Silver Citadel loomed ahead, its towering spires piercing the sky like blades of light against the encroaching darkness. But as Kale and Lyra approached, the sight that greeted them was far from the sanctuary they had hoped for. The Citadel was under siege, its once proud walls scarred by fire and shadow. The air was thick with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded, a cacophony of desperation and defiance. The Shadow Horde had come in full force, their twisted forms swarming the battlefield like a tide of darkness. The Guardians, though valiant, were outnumbered and outmatched, their ranks thinning with every passing moment. At the heart of the chaos stood the Guardians' leader, a figure of legend now brought low. His armor was cracked, his sword shattered, and his body bore the marks of countless wounds. He fought on, his movements sluggish but determined, a beacon of hope for those who still stood. Yet even his strength was waning, and the tide of battle was turning against them. Kale's heart sank as he took in the scene, the weight of their situation pressing down on him like a stone. The amulet pulsed at his side, its light a faint reminder of the power he carried and the price it demanded. Without hesitation, Kale charged into the fray, Lyra close behind. The amulet's light flared as he raised it high, a brilliant burst of energy that forced the Horde back. For a moment, the tide seemed to shift. The Guardians rallied, their spirits lifted by the sudden surge of hope, but the reprieve was short-lived. The amulet's power, though immense, came at a cost. Kale could feel it draining him, sapping his strength with every pulse of light. His vision blurred, his limbs grew heavy, and the world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. Yet he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. The Warlord, a towering figure of darkness, emerged from the chaos, his eyes blazing with malice. He raised his massive blade, its edge glinting with an unnatural light, and let out a guttural roar that shook the ground. Kale met his gaze, his grip tightening on the amulet. The Warlord's voice was a low, venomous growl. "You think your trinket can save you, boy. Your defiance only delays the inevitable." Kale's mind raced. The amulet's power was waning, and so was he. The Guardians were holding, but barely. If he didn't act soon, the Citadel would fall, and with it, the last hope for Luminara. He glanced at Lyra, her face grim but resolute, and at the wounded leader, still fighting despite the odds. The decision crystallized in his mind, sharp and unyielding. He had to risk it all. With a deep breath, Kale closed his eyes and focused on the amulet, calling upon its full power. The light surged, brighter and more intense than ever before. It felt like fire, coursing through his veins, a raw, uncontrollable force that threatened to consume him. The Warlord's blade struck, but the amulet's light repelled it, sending him stumbling back. The Horde faltered, their forms withering under the amulet's radiance. The Guardians rallied, their renewed strength turning the tide of battle, but the cost was steep. Kale's body gave out, his strength spent. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the Warlord retreating, his form swallowed by the shadows. The battle was won, but at what cost? As Kale fell, the amulet's light dimmed, its power spent. The Guardians rushed to his side, their voices a distant murmur as the world faded to black. The Citadel was saved, but Kale's fate hung in the balance, his sacrifice a testament to the weight of the burden he carried. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo in the silence, a solemn reminder of the path he had chosen and the trials that still lay ahead. Kale's eyes fluttered open, the world around him a blur of soft light and hushed voices. The air smelled of herbs and old stone, and the faint hum of energy told him he was no longer on the battlefield. He was in the Silver Citadel, its high ceilings and ancient carvings, a stark contrast to the chaos he had last seen. Slowly, The faces above him came into focus, stern, weathered men and women clad in the silver armor of the Guardians. Their expressions were a mix of reverence and relief, and as Kale tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness forced him back down. Easy, came a deep, steady voice. You've been through more than most could endure. The speaker stepped forward, an imposing figure with silver hair and a face etched with the lines of countless battles. Elandor, the leader of the Silver Guardians, regarded Kale with a gaze that was both piercing and kind. You've done what many thought impossible, Elandor said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. The Citadel stands because of your bravery. You've earned the title of Guardian, Kale, but the fight is far from over. Kale's heart swelled with pride, but it was quickly tempered by a gnawing unease. He could feel the amulet at his side, its presence, a constant reminder of the power he now carried. Elandor's expression grew somber as he motioned for the others to leave the room. When they were alone, the old mentor sat beside Kale, his tone shifting to one of grave seriousness. The amulet you carry, he began, is more than a tool of protection. It is the key to an ancient weapon, a weapon capable of destroying the Shadow Horde once and for all. Kale's breath caught. Hope surged within him, but it was quickly overshadowed by the look in Elandor's eyes. There's a cost, isn't there? Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elandor nodded, his gaze steady. To activate the weapon, a life must be given. A willing sacrifice. The amulet's power is tied to the soul of its bearer, and only through that bond can the weapon be unleashed. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Kale like a stone. He had always known the road ahead would demand sacrifice, but this was something else entirely. To save Luminara, he might have to give up his own life. The thought left him hollow, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Was he ready to make that choice? Could he ask someone else to? And what would it mean for those he left behind? As Kale wrestled with the moral weight of Elandor's words, Lyra stood in the shadows of the Citadel's great hall, her thoughts a storm of guilt and regret. The sight of Kale, broken and battered yet still fighting for others, had shaken her in ways she couldn't fully understand. She had always been a survivor, looking out for herself first and foremost. But now, faced with the truth of her past and the weight of her choices, she felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. She thought of the man in the forest, his accusations still ringing in her ears. She had betrayed the Guardians once, trading their secrets for her own survival. It was a decision she had justified 1,000 times over, but now, standing in the heart of the Citadel she had once forsaken, the guilt was unbearable. Kale's unwavering belief in her, his willingness to trust her despite the shadows in her past, had become a mirror, reflecting the person she had been and the person she wanted to be. The truth clawed at her, demanding to be spoken. She owed it to Kale, to the Guardians, to herself, but the thought of facing them, of seeing the disappointment in their eyes, was almost too much to bear. She leaned against the cold stone wall, her fingers tracing the hilt of her dagger, as if it could anchor her in the storm of her emotions. She had spent so long running from her past, but now, standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything, she realized she couldn't run anymore. The Citadel was alive with the sounds of preparation, the Guardians rallying for the battles to come. But for Kale and Lyra, the true war was within. The amulet's power, the weapon it could unlock, the sacrifices it demanded, these were not just questions of strategy or strength. They were questions of heart, of what it meant to be a hero and what it meant to be human. The path ahead was darker than ever, but one thing was clear. The choices they made now would define not just their own fates, but the fate of all Luminara. Kale stood in the training yard of the Silver Citadel, the morning sun casting long shadows across the stone courtyard. Around him, the guardians moved with precision, their blades cutting through the air in perfect harmony. He gripped the hilt of his father's sword shard, its jagged edges a constant reminder of the burden he carried. Training with the guardians was unlike anything he had experienced before. Every movement, every strike, was designed to push him beyond his limits, to prepare him for the battles ahead. Yet, as he parried and countered, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still an outsider, still unworthy of the trust they placed in him. Lyra watched from the sidelines, her sharp eyes following his every move. She had become a constant presence in his training, offering tips and critiques with her usual bluntness. But there was something different in the way she looked at him now, softer, almost protective. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the fires of battle and the quiet moments in between. Yet, beneath the surface, a tension lingered. Kale had noticed the way she hesitated when questions about her past arose, the shadows that crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to ask, to understand, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the fear of what he might discover. During one particularly intense sparring match, Kale's focus wavered. The amulet at his side pulsed faintly, its energy intertwining with his own, and for a moment, he lost control. His strike came faster, harder than he intended, and the dulled edge of his blade caught Lyra's arm. She hissed in pain, her dagger clattering to the ground as she clutched the wound. Kale froze, his breath catching in his throat. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice thick with guilt. "I didn't mean to." Lyra cut him off with a wave of her hand, her expression more annoyed than angry. "It's fine," she said, though the tightness in her voice suggested otherwise. "You're holding back too much. You're afraid of the amulet, of what it can do, but you can't fight like that. You'll get yourself killed, or worse, someone else." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Kale's fear of the amulet's power, of the chaos it could unleash, was holding him back. And now, because of his hesitation, he had hurt someone he cared about. The incident left Kale shaken. That night, he found himself sitting alone in the Citadel's chapel, the amulet resting in his hands. Its light was faint, almost hesitant, as though it too felt the weight of his doubts. Elandor found him there, the old mentor's footsteps echoing softly against the stone floor. "You carry more than just the amulet, Kale," Elandor said, his voice calm but firm. "You carry the hopes of everyone who believes in you, but you cannot let fear guide your hand. Trust in your heart, in the strength of your spirit. That is where true power lies." Kale nodded, but the words did little to ease the knot of anxiety in his chest. The pressure of his mission, the weight of the amulet's power, felt like a mountain pressing down on him. Every decision he made, every step he took, carried consequences far beyond what he could imagine. And now, with the Shadow Horde's attacks growing more frequent and more violent, the stakes were higher than ever. The Guardians were preparing for a final stand, their ranks bolstered by reinforcements from neighboring villages. The Citadel buzzed with activity, its halls filled with the sounds of preparation and the grim determination of those who knew what was coming. Kale trained harder, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion, but the doubts lingered. He could feel the amulet's power growing within him, a force that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And as the days passed, the tension between him and Lyra grew, her secret hanging over them like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. The final stand was coming, and Kale knew he would have to face not just the Shadow Horde, but the darkness within himself. The amulet's power was a gift and a curse, and the choices he made would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of all Luminara. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo in his mind, a reminder of the path he had chosen, and the trials that still lay ahead. The question was no longer whether he could wield the amulet's power, but whether he could control it, and whether he could trust himself to do what needed to be done. The silence in the Citadel's chapel was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the amulet's light flickering in Kale's hands. Lyra stood at the doorway, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. Her fingers fidgeted with the hilt of her dagger, a nervous habit she rarely showed. She had avoided this moment for so long, burying the truth beneath layers of sarcasm and bravado. But now, with the Shadow Horde closing in and the fate of Luminara hanging in the balance, she could no longer hide. She stepped forward, her boots echoing softly on the stone floor. "Kale," she began, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "There's something I need to tell you." Kale turned, his expression softening as he saw the turmoil in her eyes. He knew something was wrong, had known for a while, but he hadn't pushed. He trusted her enough to let her come to him in her own time. Now, as she stood before him, her shoulders stiff with tension, he braced himself for what was coming. "I'm listening," he said, his tone calm but expectant. Lyra took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I wasn't always on your side," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Before we met, I worked for the Horde. I traded information about the Guardians for my own survival. I betrayed them, Kale. I betrayed you." Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of her guilt finally breaking through. She expected anger, betrayal, perhaps even disgust. What she didn't expect was the quiet understanding in Kale's eyes. For a long moment, Kale said nothing. The revelation hit him like a blow, but it wasn't the betrayal itself that stung. It was the pain in Lyra's voice, the way her hands trembled as she confessed. He had seen her fight, seen her risk her life for others, and he knew the person she was now wasn't the same as the one she had been. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice steady but gentle. Lyra's eyes flicked up to meet his, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Because I can't keep lying to you. Not after everything we've been through. You trusted me, and I need you to know the truth, even if it means you never trust me again." Kale took a step closer, his hand brushing hers. "You're not that person anymore, Lyra. I've seen who you are now. Someone who fights for others, who stands by my side when it matters most. Your past doesn't define you. What you do now does." His words were firm but kind, a quiet reassurance that left Lyra breathless. She had spent so long running from her mistakes, convinced they would always haunt her. But here, in this moment, Kale's forgiveness felt like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge. The tension between them eased, replaced by a newfound sense of solidarity. Lyra's confession, far from breaking their bond, had deepened it. They were no longer just allies, they were partners, bound by trust and a shared purpose. With the weight of her secret lifted, Lyra felt a clarity she hadn't known in years. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steadier now. "The Horde's stronghold is heavily guarded, but I know their weaknesses. If we can infiltrate their ranks, we might be able to activate the weapon before it's too late." Kale nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll need to move quickly and strike hard, but we'll do it together." The stakes were higher than ever, the risk of failure unthinkable. Yet as they stood side by side, the amulet's light glowing faintly between them, Kale felt a surge of determination. They had faced impossible odds before and come out stronger. This time would be no different. The plan took shape over the next few hours, a daring strategy that relied on stealth, precision, and an unshakable trust in one another. Kale's decision to forgive Lyra, to see the person she had become rather than the mistakes she had made, became the foundation of their alliance. It was a pivotal moment, a turning point in their journey that would define not just their fates, but the fate of all Luminara. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo their resolve, a silent promise that they were not alone. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but together they would face it head on. The fortress of the Shadow Horde loomed like a jagged scar against the horizon, its dark spires piercing the sky as if daring the light to touch them. Kale, Lyra, and their small team of guardians approached under the cover of night, the air thick with tension and the distant howls of the Horde's sentinels. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a storm cloud ready to burst. They moved in silence, their breaths shallow, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The fortress was a labyrinth of death, its walls lined with traps and its halls teeming with enemies, but there was no turning back now. The fate of Luminara depended on their success. The first trap came without warning. A guardian stepped on a seemingly innocent stone, and the ground beneath them erupted in a cascade of spikes. Kale reacted instantly, yanking the man back just as the spikes snapped shut. The near miss left them all shaken, their nerves frayed, but there was no time to dwell on it. Lyra took the lead, her sharp eyes picking out the faintest signs of danger. Her experience as a thief, once a source of shame, now became their greatest asset. She guided them through the maze of traps, with a precision that left no room for error, her movements quick and deliberate. Yet even her skill couldn't shield them entirely. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and a guardian fell, his body swallowed by the darkness. Kale's heart ached with every loss, the faces of the fallen etched into his memory. He had brought them here, and now they were paying the price. The guilt threatened to overwhelm him, but he couldn't afford to falter. He pushed forward, his resolve hardening with every step. The team's unity became their lifeline, their trust in one another, the only thing keeping them alive. Kale's leadership emerged not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments of reassurance. A hand on a shoulder, a steady gaze, a whispered word of encouragement. He was their anchor, and they clung to him as the chaos around them grew. The deeper they ventured, the more relentless the horde became. Shadow beasts lunged from the darkness, their forms twisting and writhing as they attacked with savage ferocity. The Guardians fought with everything they had, their blades cutting through the air in a desperate dance of survival. Kael's amulet flared with light, its power repelling the creatures, but each use came at a cost. He could feel it draining him, his strength waning with every pulse of energy. Yet he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. As they neared the weapons chamber, the tension reached a breaking point. The air grew colder, the whispers of the fortress more insistent, as though the very walls were alive and watching. Kale could feel the Warlord's presence, a suffocating weight that seemed to press against his chest. The final stretch was the most dangerous, a narrow corridor lined with traps and guarded by the Horde's most fearsome warriors. The team moved as one, their movements synchronized, their breath steady despite the fear that clawed at their hearts. But the cost was high. Another Guardian fell, his sacrifice buying them precious seconds to press forward. When they finally reached the chamber's entrance, the reality of their situation hit Kale like a blow. The Warlord stood waiting, his massive form silhouetted against the eerie glow of the weapon. His eyes burned with malice, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down Kale's spine. "You've come far, boy," he sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. "But this is where your journey ends." Kale's grip tightened on the amulet, its light flaring in response to his resolve. He knew what lay ahead, a battle not just of strength, but of will. The Warlord was a force of darkness, his power unmatched, his cruelty boundless. But Kale had something the Warlord could never understand, a reason to fight. For Luminara, for the fallen, for the hope of a future free from the Shadow Horde's tyranny. He stepped forward, his team at his back, their unity unbroken despite the odds. The final battle was upon them, and Kale was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The chamber was a storm of chaos, the air crackling with dark energy as Kale faced the Warlord. The Warlord's towering form loomed like a shadow given life, his eyes burning with malice as he raised a clawed hand. "You think your little trinket can save you?" He sneered, his voice a guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very stone. "You're nothing but a child playing at hero." Kale tightened his grip on the amulet, its light flaring in response to his resolve. He knew this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul of Luminara. The clash was brutal, each strike from the Warlord's massive blade sending shockwaves through the chamber. Kale fought with everything he had, his movements sharp and desperate, but the Warlord's dark magic was relentless. Shadows coiled around Kale like living chains, sapping his strength and clouding his vision. Every blow he landed felt like striking stone, and every step forward came at the cost of his energy. The amulet's light flickered, its power waning as the Warlord's laughter echoed through the chamber. "You're weak," the Warlord spat, his voice dripping with scorn. "Just like your father." The words struck a nerve, but before Kale could react, the Warlord's blade came down in a crushing arc. Kale raised the amulet, its light flaring to repel the strike, but the force sent him sprawling. Pain erupted across his chest, his vision swimming as he struggled to rise. The warlord loomed over him, his expression a mask of triumph. "This is where it ends," he growled, raising his blade for the final blow, but the strike never came. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and defiant. "Not today." She lunged at the warlord, her daggers flashing as she struck with a ferocity that left even the warlord momentarily stunned. Her movements were a blur, her strikes precise and unrelenting, but the warlord was no ordinary foe. With a roar, he lashed out, his dark magic slamming into her with brutal force. Lyra crumpled to the ground, her body racked with pain, but her eyes never left Kael's. "Do it now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Finish him." Kael's heart shattered. Lyra's sacrifice, her willingness to throw herself into the line of fire, was a testament to the person she had become, but there was no time to grieve. The warlord turned back to Kale, his expression twisted with rage. Lyra's attack had weakened him, his dark magic faltering, but he was far from defeated. Kale rose to his feet, the amulet's light flaring brighter than ever. This was his moment, his chance to end the warlord's reign of terror. With a cry of defiance, Kale charged, the amulet's power surging through him like a tidal wave. He struck with everything he had, his blade cutting through the warlord's defenses. The warlord roared, his dark magic lashing out, but Kale pressed on, driven by a force greater than fear. The final blow came swift and true, the amulet's light piercing the warlord's chest. For a moment, the chamber was still, the warlord's expression frozen in shock. Then, with a final, guttural cry, he crumbled to dust, his form disintegrating into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. Kale fell to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion and grief. Lyra lay motionless nearby, her face pale but peaceful. The weight of her sacrifice pressed down on him, a reminder of the cost of their victory, but there was no time to mourn. The weapon loomed ahead, its eerie glow a stark reminder of what still needed to be done. The amulet pulsed faintly in his hand, its light dim but steady. The weapon's activation required a life, a willing sacrifice. Kale had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the reality of it was almost too much to bear. He rose to his feet, his resolve hardening. Luminara's fate rested in his hands, and he would not falter now. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo in his mind, a solemn reminder of the path he had chosen. The weapon's glow intensified as he approached, its light a beacon of hope and despair. Kale took a deep breath, his hand tightening around the amulet. This was it, the moment that would define him, not just as a warrior, but as a guardian of Luminara. The sacrifice was his to make, and he would not hesitate. For Lyra, for the fallen, for the future of all he held dear, Kale stood before the ancient weapon, its eerie glow casting long shadows across the chamber. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the faint hum of energy emanating from the amulet in his hands. Its light pulsed faintly, as if echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the culmination of everything he had fought for, everything he had lost. His mind raced with memories of his father's broken sword, the whispers of the forest, the villagers who had looked to him for hope, and Lyra. Always Lyra. Her face flashed before him, her sharp eyes softened by the vulnerability she had shown in her final moments. She had believed in him, even when he hadn't believed in himself. And now it was his turn to make the ultimate choice. The weapon loomed ahead, its intricate carvings glowing with an otherworldly light. It was a thing of beauty and terror, a relic of a power so vast it could reshape the world. But that power came at a cost Kale had always known he might have to pay. The amulet's light grew brighter as he stepped closer, its energy intertwining with his own. He could feel it pulling at him, as if it knew what he was about to do. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer enormity of the decision before him. To save Luminara, he would have to give up everything. His life, his future, the love he had found. It would all end here, but what choice did he have? The Shadow Horde was relentless, their darkness spreading like a plague. If he didn't act now, there would be nothing left to save. With a deep breath, Kale raised the amulet, its light flaring as he called upon its full power. The energy surged through him, a raw, uncontrollable force that threatened to consume him. He could feel it burning through his veins, his body trembling under its intensity. But he didn't falter. He couldn't. The faces of those he had lost flashed before him. His father, the villagers, the guardians who had fallen beside him. And Lyra, her voice echoed in his mind, soft but unwavering. "You're stronger than this." She had been right. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for all of them. For Luminara, for the future they had dreamed of. As the amulet's light reached its peak, Kale closed his eyes and offered his life to the weapon. The energy surged, a blinding wave of light that filled the chamber and spilled out into the fortress, consuming everything in its path. The Shadow Horde, caught in the light's radiance, let out a final, guttural cry before disintegrating into nothingness. The fortress itself seemed to tremble, its dark walls crumbling under the force of the weapon's power. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Kale's body crumpled to the ground, the amulet slipping from his grasp. The chamber was silent, save for the faint sound of the wind whispering through the cracks in the fortress walls. The weapon's glow dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. Luminara was saved, the Shadow Horde obliterated, but at what cost? Kale's form lay motionless, his fate uncertain. The amulet's light flickered faintly beside him, its energy spent. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo in the silence, a solemn reminder of the sacrifice he had made. The hero who had given everything for the world he loved now lay in the quiet aftermath, his legacy etched into the very fabric of Luminara's history. The question lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. Had Kale's journey truly ended, or was this merely the beginning of something greater? The kingdom of Luminara stood reborn, its skies clear, and its people free from the shadow that had haunted them for so long. The Silver Citadel, once a bastion of desperation, now radiated with a quiet strength. In its grand hall, the guardians gathered, their silver armor gleaming as they paid tribute to the one who had given everything for their survival. Kale's name was spoken with reverence, his story etched into the hearts of all who heard it. Beside his name, Lyra's was carved in equal honor, her sacrifice, a testament to the power of redemption and the bonds forged in the fires of battle. Together, they became more than heroes. They became legends, their legacy a beacon for all who would follow. The Silver Amulet, once a source of immense power, now rested in a place of honor within the Citadel. Its light had dimmed, its energy spent, but its presence remained a symbol of hope. Encased in glass and surrounded by the whispers of history, it served as a reminder of the price paid for peace. Villagers and guardians alike would come to gaze upon it, their hearts stirred by the story it represented. It was not just an artifact, but a testament to the courage and sacrifice that had saved their world. The amulet's quiet glow seemed to echo the resilience of Luminara itself, a promise that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. Kale's legacy rippled through the kingdom, inspiring a new generation of Silver Guardians. Young warriors trained with renewed vigor, their eyes alight with the same determination that had driven Kale. They spoke of his bravery, of his willingness to stand against impossible odds, and of his unwavering belief in the goodness of others. His story became a cornerstone of their training, a reminder that true strength lay not in power alone, but in the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The Guardian's ranks swelled with those eager to carry on his mission, their vows echoing through the halls of the Citadel, to protect, to serve, and to never falter in the face of darkness. Yet, amid the celebrations and the tales of triumph, a quiet mystery lingered. In the depths of the whispering forest, where shadows once danced and whispers once taunted, a new light began to emerge. Travelers spoke of a silver glow that flickered among the trees, soft and ethereal, like the breath of a ghost. Some claimed it was the forest itself, healed and renewed by Kale's sacrifice. Others believed it was Kale's spirit, watching over the land he had loved so deeply. The whispers grew, weaving a tale of a guardian who never truly left, his presence a silent promise that Luminara would never stand alone. The bond between Kale and Lyra became the heart of countless stories, told and retold around hearths and campfires. Their journey, marked by sacrifice and redemption, resonated deeply with the people of Luminara. Songs were sung of their courage, their names becoming synonymous with hope and unity. Artists painted their likenesses, capturing the fire in Lyra's eyes and the quiet strength in Kale's gaze. Their story was no longer just theirs. It belonged to the kingdom, a living reminder of what could be achieved when hearts beat as one. As the years passed, Luminara flourished, its people thriving under the protection of the Silver Guardians. The Whispering Forest, once a place of fear, became a sanctuary, its silver light a symbol of peace. The Citadel stood tall, its halls filled with the echoes of laughter and the clatter of training swords. And though Kale's fate remained a mystery, his spirit seemed to live on in every corner of the realm. The children who played beneath the forest's silver glow, the guardians who stood watch over the kingdom, the villagers who told his story, they all carried a piece of him, a spark of the light he had ignited. The tale of Kale and Lyra was not just one of victory, but of transformation. It was a story of how even the darkest shadows could be dispelled by the smallest flicker of light, of how sacrifice could forge a legacy that outlasted time itself. And as the kingdom of Luminara moved forward, its people carried that legacy in their hearts, a silent vow to honor the heroes who had given them everything. The whispers of the forest, once filled with warnings, now carried a different message, that even in the face of uncertainty, hope could endure, and the light would always find a way to shine.